All right, we're continuing with a mimer in LIkuti Torah in Parshat Bahar. Yesterday we began talking about love. Of God. How can we love God? How can we really have love? Not just to fake it, but actually true, genuine love of God. So, says the Rebbe, first of all, the Jewish people, they're called the chosen people. They're called the sons of God also. B'ni Bechori, my son, my chosen one, Israel. And one of the reasons why they're called the sons of God is because they demonstrate a certain type of love. Or let's not say they demonstrate, but they have in potential a type of a love that can be revealed. That's a natural love of God. That's what it means the Jewish people are the sons of God. In other words, I can love, the love that I have for my father is more unconditional than, let's say, the love I have for a nice man or my next door neighbor or a good teacher. That's sort of dependent on the conditions. You know, my next door neighbor is a nice guy. He says hello to me if he really helps me. One time he saved me. You know, my car fell on me. I was on the jack and he lifted it up. He loaned me money. He helped me. So I like him. You know, I see he's a nice person also. But a person's father, there's something deep there. Some sort of a deep, I want to call it a natural, deep connection. And so it is also true, let's say a brother and a sister, you know, a brother and a sister. Of course, nowadays in our society, and generally, there's also, you know, hatred between brothers, family feuds and things like that. But generally speaking, the love that is available for a son and a father, it's a different type of a love than any other type of love that can be. So it says that's what happens to the Jewish people. The Jewish people have this natural, deep down love for God. They don't even know it. They don't know it. In fact, it says the Rebbe, most people don't know it. And even if they do know it, here we're reading it in this mimer, so you don't feel it. So it says this has to be, sometimes it can be revealed and sometimes it can be concealed. And this is the way God wanted it. He put the soul in the body in order that the body would cover it over and that we would then transform the body, because the Jewish people are supposed to transform the whole entire world and reveal that the whole entire world is a creation and that there's a reason for the creation, that there's a creator that's creating the world. It's not just that the world is God. The world is created by God, and it's created by God for a purpose. And it says, and those people who feel this all the time and have this love of God, those people are called tzaddikim. Those people are called, well, just going a little bit of a summary of what we did yesterday. Those called tzaddikim because their godly soul is revealed and it desires to be included in the oneness of God. There's also, by non-Jews, also there are people who are very spiritual and they will fast and they were very religious people and very spiritual people and people that are interested in getting to the truth as far as they know it. But for some reason, those people don't come to the conclusion that, there's God who creates the world according to the Torah, and he gave it to the Jewish people, and that this is this is the natural love that every human being should feel, because God is creating everybody. You know, somebody comes and gives you $1 million and calls you by your name. So you like this person. Yes, I appreciate you. Well, God appreciates everybody. He gives us something more valuable than money. He gives us our very life. But we don't recognize it. We don't know it. So that's supposed to be the job of the Jewish people, is to inform the world that there is God and that we're not alone and that there's a purpose to the world and it's not a jungle and it's not a meaningless, bumble of just, occurrences and meaningless facts, and you just have to put the whole thing together yourself. The Jewish people are here. I mean, that's one way of looking at the world, but the Jewish people are here to say that that's not the correct way. and that there is a law, and that there is a God, and that there is meaning, and that there is purpose, and that there is love. There is such a thing as love, and that God has infinite love for each and every one of his creations. That's why he's creating us. It says, but who feels this? Who really believes? Which Jew really believes this? Really brings this out and feels this love, not just believing it, but feels it. That's called the tzaddikim. Tzaddikim really feel that. It says, but other people, they have to have hitbonanut. They have to think, contemplate very deeply if this is really true. All what I just said, is it really true or is it not true? I'm being created, and there really is a God. They have to really think deeply into this. And the main impediment to thinking deeply and also to coming to any sort of a unity with the Creator, feeling, well, God really is creating that, really is, this is incredible, is ourselves. So he says, therefore, a person, especially a person's heart, there's all sorts of different levels that the animal soul, a natural personality, covers over our feeling of godliness, that we're being created by God. Our natural personality, our natural feelings that we have. And of course, the father of them all is the natural feeling that I have a separate existence. I don't know what you're talking about. God is creating me. What does that mean? That's the most natural thing in the world. It's to just feel that I'm here and that there's no God that created me. And how do I exist? Not my problem. Let the philosophers talk about it. I know that, why should I change my life for this God who's invisible? So the answer is, well, he's not so invisible. He's creating you. And you just have to have a certain degree of faith in this and connection to this. And then it becomes more probable that you'll do what he says. God is creating you. And that God wants a good world. He says one of the big things that impedes this and prevents. By the way, that's going to be the one of the accomplishments of Moshiach, that he's going to make the whole world realize that there's a God. Everyone will realize that I'm being created by God, and I'm being created by a purpose, and I'm being created from love. Every human being. What's one of the impediments? It's what's called gasot ruach. Gasot ruach means the thickness of spirit. Thickness of spirit. Spirit is a very nice thing, but there can be gasot ruach. Gasot ruach means that you make everything egotistical. Like it says, ani bahu, ein ani bahu. God said, I cannot dwell in the world wherever there is egotism. You have to open up the covering. And that'll really, there's a story that they say about the Rebbe of Kotsk, Menachem Mendel of Kotsk. The Gerur Hasidim, they came from Kotsk. And he was a very holy person, tremendously holy person, tremendously sincere, devoted person. But he was also very dynamic, very lively. And once he had a lot of opposition. Of course, the religious Jews had a tremendous amount of opposition also. And these anti-religious Jews came up to him and jokingly and said, tell me, Rabbi, you believe in this God, I'll give you a zloty, whatever the currency was over there in Poland. I'll give you this, $10 if you tell me where God is. So he said, I'll give you $10 if you tell me where God is not. Right? God is creating everything, so he's in everything. So afterwards they came, maybe the same group or another group or another time they came and they made the same deal. They said, I'll give you $10, Rabbi, if you tell me where God is. So maybe this time you needed the money or something. So he said, where God is wherever you let him in. If you let him in, then he's everywhere. You don't let him in, then he's not there. Wherever you let him in. In other words, it depends on you. So that's what it says. If there's an ani, if there's a me, then you can't feel God. As long as you're thinking about yourself and feeling about yourself, and you're not even considering the possibility that maybe I'm being created, maybe God is creating me. I exist. I exactly the opposite. I create God. Right? If you want to make this construct, this logical, whatever it is, emotional construct, there's such a thing as God, okay, do it. Do it. It says, but and ani who God is saying, God is saying, I and a person who cannot dwell. If you think that you're separate from me, then I can't be there. That's what the Rebbe of Kutsk said. Wherever you let him in, wherever you allow him to enter, that's where God is. So that's where a person who wants to have love of this God set in his heart, then he has to, if he wants the love of God to be in the inside of his heart, Shalom Boker Tov. Good morning. Also, if a person wants to have this love of God, he wants to have this awareness of God in his heart, the kanesel toch panimis, the kudus leiv, into the innerness of his heart, toch tocho, into him from the omkad liba, the depth of his heart, mamish mikolas and nefesh, that a person is really like expiring, right? Like there's these love songs, or like we see nowadays, people what they're willing to do for money or for power. Kolas the nefesh, ubitl b'metzias, and a person is totally surrendered. If a person really wants to have this feeling of being totally harmonious and surrendered to his creator, liot lo leiv dishpar, therefore it's necessary to have a broken heart. You have to break your heart a little bit. What does it mean, breaking your heart? Saying, listen, I think this, but maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm wrong. Or even more, I think this and I want this, but I am wrong. These thoughts are coming from some sort of a, anti-life force inside of me. You want to call it the devil, Satan, evil impulse. Therefore, I have to break my heart, not to pay so much attention to all these urges that I have. The ruach nishbara, and to break a person has to break sometimes his own egotistical spirit. Ulahasir gasot ruach, and to remove the thickness of his spirit. The koach hametave, and the power of his desire, the davar gashmi, for physical things, liyot yesh v'nifrad b'fnei atzmo, that a person wants to be separate and big on himself, rak yasim alav libo, that your heart should be only to God. Now, don't think this in any way precludes a fact that a person could be rich. So some of the biggest tzaddikim were rich. It says even that the prophets, they made them rich. But the thing is that who owns what? I own the money, or the money owns me? Mr. Rabbi say, open up your heart like the opening in a needle. You ever try to thread a needle? Right? Sometimes if you ever got really good eyes, you can forget it. Thread a needle. And I'll open, if you open up just a little bit, then God says, I'll help you. I'll open you up, I'll open your heart, like the Pitre Shel Ulam, like the opening of the Ulam, of the in the temple, in the holy temple, there was a big opening. It didn't have any door on it. It was open all the time. It was the biggest opening in the holy temple. So he said, you open me make me a little opening. There's a possibility. Maybe there's God who's creating me, gave the Torah. He really loves me, wants me to act and feel the way that he wants. He's the creator. He says, you give that little opening and I'll open you up like your heart to the truth. This was the big opening that was in front of the holy temple, Beit HaMikdash. The Heichal was like the entranceway to the holy and the holy of holies. Because it says that if a person comes to refine himself, Messiah, God will help him. To remove all this thickness of spirit and egotism, and to elevate the person mila, very high ad Roma mila, to the highest of levels. What does this mean? The highest levels? Appreciation of the truth. Appreciation of the truth. It's like anything else. Let's say music. Let's say a person says, music is stupid. I hate it. It's awful. Music is for fools, for idiots. Right? Main thing is you have to have boxing, wrestling, you're punching each other. And that's reality. What's this? Everybody just sitting there and listening to this music? It's terrible. Just listen, maybe give it a chance. Someone, a chance. They're talking about listen to some music. I don't listen to music. I don't want nothing to do with it. Leave me alone. Right? And then all of a sudden, one day he hears, right, somebody convinces him, listen, just sit for 5 minutes and 3 minutes and just listen to a nice song. I don't like that. I don't like that. I don't like this song. All of a sudden, here's somebody singing, a violinist. That was sort of nice. Calm me down a little bit. That was music. That was music. Really? Are you serious? Music. If you just open up a little possibility that maybe could be music is a good thing, then you can enter into a new world of music. Okay, but here's a different thing. Here's a little bit different. Here we're talking about the living God. Music is part of the world. We are, if you want to call it, part of. It's not the proper word. We're within, also not the proper word, but because God is creating us. God is more real than we are. Our reality comes from God. It's not like music, that music is just part of the world, something that we appreciate. But on the other hand, the reason I brought the example is because music is a sense. It's a sense that a person can have, that he has to open himself up to possibility, and that he can feel this sense of something that's sort of above the physical. Music is sort of a spiritual thing. We're talking about God is he creates the spiritual. He's creating you. He's creating me. When a person feels this, he has new values in life, new levels of love, appreciation, and openness, and less, I say, the tension and apprehension. Therefore, it says that's what it means that it elevates the person. The person becomes simply more human. That you can live every second more genuinely. You can appreciate others. You can help others. And you're not ruled over by negative emotions. This, or again, this love will be radiated into the inside of your face. Wow, God is really creating nothing. It's amazing. He's creating the whole world. Then you can feel this love. And that's just the beginning. This feeling of love, that's just the entrance that God is creating me. That's the lowest aspect of godness He's creating. And higher than that is He's creating me for a purpose. And higher than that is that God loves me unconditionally. Its whole soul can be negated. This is for non-Jews as well. That it'll be like a flame that goes up on its own, the kalel and the babet, the oral Yisrael, to be included in the light of the creator of the universe. Okay, not everybody's going to come to this tremendous level of appreciation, but you should know that this is the truth. This is the level of achoti. This is the level we said of my sister. God's sister. What does it mean when we're God's sister? A sister, you can't stop being a sister. We become God's sister, so to speak. The love will be constant. This is the level of the tzaddikim. And then there's a higher level. This is the level of ra'iti, of my, you see, my beloved. It doesn't mean my beloved. It means my shepherd. What does it mean? Ra'iti. We did this yesterday. That's what the rabbis say. The Jewish people, they provide for their Father in heaven. We feed God. We give God nourishment. Well, you can see, because like it says, says they will not be pushed away from God, even the most pushed away person. Like it says in the Pesachim, and namely, it means to be totally united with the body of the Creator. Now, the Creator doesn't have a body, of course, but on the other hand, if He creates all the world, so obviously its existence must be much more real than ours. So God's body, so to speak, wants to say the body because to tell you that it's real, but it's infinite, but it's infinitely real. So let's see what this means. What happens there to understand this? What does it mean that the soul provides for God? Let's understand this. How can it be that the soul, which is a creation, it's a thing on its own, everybody has their own name and etc. Can be united with the truth of God, the essence of God. Like we say, God is not just this idea, it's not a spirit, it's not a spiritual idea. But all the religions are spiritual. Judaism is saying, no, spiritual is just like a ladder to get away from your own physical misconceptions of the world. So God made the spiritual to know that if you think that all there is just you, so you're wrong. The real reality is not me. There's spirituality also. A person starts to feel spiritual, so he gets a lot of these benefits we said before. Right? He doesn't get so angry. He's not so caught up in the world. He's more, what do you say, he lives a world of values. That's what all the religions are. But the essence of God creates everything. God creates all these spirits and religions and everything. So how can a person possibly, spiritual, okay, we can understand there's spiritual people, but how can a person be united with the creator that's infinitely more real than the spiritual? You see, like take an example, like all the religions, right? So they say, listen, if you're poor, you have these religions, especially in the East, billions of people, right? If you have money, you can't go to heaven. If you're married, you're not going to go to heaven. If you have any concern with the physical world, you're not going to go to heaven. Okay, so people like money. They like, to have families. We're not talking, let's say people that do like that. There's people that just don't want, they don't care. There's people that they don't care about money by their nature. They don't care about money. They're very cold to the world. Okay, it doesn't mean that they're spiritual. That's their nature. We're talking about a person that's a normal person, that he would like to, get married. He would like to have money. But he says, no, in order to go to heaven, I'm willing to forget. So what happens? All of a sudden, the spiritual overcomes the physical. Right? Because he's got the spiritual idea in his mind, and maybe even he feels something. So he says, I'm going to live my whole life. I'm a monk, a nun, a hermit, or whatever he is. And I'm just going to chant all the time, and then I'm going to go to heaven, which could be maybe they go to heaven. I don't know. I mean, I'm not the boss of heaven. But the fact of the matter is that there's a creator, and the creator, he creates everything, and it's possible to connect to the creator. That's infinitely more real. And not only that, the creator, he creates the heavens, but he also creates the earth. And the main thing about the creation of the earth is the main thing. But how can you get connected to the creator? How is it possible? We're just people. It says in the Zohar, that's what the Torah is for. Talas kasharim is kashim kechara. There are three things that are tied together: the Torah, God, and the Jewish people. That's what the Jewish people are here for. That's why only the Jewish people have this place called the Holy Temple. God gave the Torah only to the Jews. God took only the Jews out of Egypt. Only the Jews have this godly soul that longs for and pines for and wants godliness. And the Jewish people and the Torah and God are one. And now we're going to learn how you can come to a higher level than even being a tzaddik. Listen to this. Key. Torah. This is the highness of the Torah. So what do we say in the previous? In the previous, we said there's a level of a tzaddik that feels godliness all the time. That's like the level of my sister. Then there's a level of regular people that once in a while they arouse godliness, right? But what about people that are totally against God? There are people that they nothing to do with God. They want absolutely nothing. They reject totally the whole idea. So it says every Jew at least, doesn't make any difference. It says that eventually God is going to make every Jew return back to his Judaism. Why? Why? If his Jew is in the world and he's supposed to feel God and he doesn't feel God and he hates the whole idea, wants nothing to do with it, why should he be pulled back? What's he going to be pulled back for? So he says, okay, there's what's called to be included in the body of God. What does this mean? We'll see. Now, I don't even think for one instant that God has some sort of a body. We're just saying that if God can create all the physical, so obviously he must be real, something more real than the physical. Maybe the spiritual, angels, things like that. No, God is more real than the spirit, than the angels, than everything. His reality is totally, angels are incomprehensible to us. God is incomprehensible to the angels. That's why the angels are burning up and screaming. And every Jew somehow or other is connected to this reality of God. That's called God's body. Kihine. Torah, because that's the whole thing of the Torah. Because the Torah is very, very high, and it's higher, the Torah is very high than the souls of the Jews. Why? Because everything comes from the Torah, right? The whole world is created from the Torah. The Haraisa, we'll see that this is not exactly so. But the Torah, the Haraisa because it says the Torah comes from God's wisdom. That's what the rabbis say. Happy is the one who comes to heaven after he dies, and he's got the Torah. Because the Torah is connected to the essence of God, even higher than the soul. To understand this, the Torah is also a book, and it's the book in the library. How did you solve any problems over there? A person, how can a person be one with God? A person is just a creation. Not through the Torah. The Torah is also a creation. The Torah is a book. It has words in it and letters. You can print it, even when it's on the parchment. But it's a physical item. Come on, you need tzitzis, for instance, and even more, the Torah speaks about all these physical things. How is that got anything to do with God? For instance, tzitzit, the corners of the garments, the strings that come from the tefillin, sukkah, all sorts of laws of mamonot, of if you make a partnership with somebody, you leave collateral by someone, and you don't come and pick it up. Or who does it belong to? What if you leave a person the land and it has trees on it? Is he allowed to eat the fruits? Does he have to give you the money for the fruits? And what if you make a condition? You didn't keep the condition. All these laws, these comes from God himself. But Tainus, all sorts of claims, lies, like it says, Ruvain, Toan Kach, Shimon, Toan Kach. Ruvain says this thing belongs to me, and Shimon says, what are you talking about? I'm the one that bought it, not you. Why do you have to go to, which is happy if you come to heaven and you have the Torah with you? Why do you have to have the Torah? Exactly the opposite. The Torah is a book in the world. It gets you through the world. Maybe it's the key to go to heaven. Once you're in heaven, finished. Right? You got in. Why does it say that happy is the one who goes to heaven and he's got the Torah with him? He's in heaven already. What does he have to have the Torah with him? And how can he take the Torah with him? What does that mean? What, he takes a book with him into heaven? It is written, God says, come and let us partake of my bread. And one of the prophets, what is it, Isaiah? Just like the physical bread. The bread, it says the sacrifices are called God's bread, and also the Torah is called God's bread. Just like the Torah, just like bread feeds a person, that through bread a person can live, physically, that it becomes digested and included in the person's limbs. Right? A person eats, he becomes fat. The fat isn't that he gets stuffed up with bread or potatoes or something. It's meat. The potatoes and the bread that he eats, that transforms to be human flesh. Kacha Torah, the same thing as the Torah. The Torah is also called food, and it's called life for the spiritual soul of a person, a Jew. So it's necessary. It has to be digested and included in the limbs of the soul. The Shava Kibasoro, and has to return to be like his flesh, really. The Torah, by means of this, a nefesh tashuv el Hashem. By means of this, the soul now becomes filled, right? We're talking about limbs of the soul, when it becomes full with Torah, the ideas of the Torah. And the ideas of the Torah are not just human ideas. The ideas of the Torah are not just spiritual ideas. The ideas of the Torah, that comes from the creator of the whole universe. By means of this, a person is called uniting with the body of the king. The Nivla Begufa, the Malka Mamish, then he becomes one with the king, because the Torah is totally one, the inner will of the creator. But it's part of the world. God gave it in the world. That's what happened in Mount Sinai. Not like with Abraham. Abraham, it says Isaac and Jacob, they knew the whole Torah before it was given, but in a spiritual way. They came to these conclusions on their own. They linked their soul with the will of God as it is in the Torah. But it wasn't the physical Torah in the world. Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, they could get to this level because they were tremendously sincere and devoted and self-sacrificing people. But what about us? What about us? Like it said over here, lo yidach mimenu nidach. What about a person that has nothing, no connection whatsoever to God or to Judaism or to... So says the Rebbe, a person like that learns the Torah. The Torah is pure godliness. Doesn't look like it because you don't know what God is. Right? You think God has to be these big white lights or something, and then you feel you get all spaced out and you talk quietly and your eyes are glazed over or whatever. You never look to the side, just straightforward. That's godliness. You're just totally out of it. You're into this other world of reality. That's not so. God is creating the world, and God is very, very dynamic, and he wants you also to be dynamic. He says, and the only way that you can really do this, says the Rebbe, is by the Torah. The Torah is pure essence of God in the world. That was what was in the Holy of Holies. What was in the Holy of Holies? The tablets. Like it says, like he said, I ate this is in Song of Songs, I ate my, what is it, yori, some sort of honey with other type of honey, food. That's what God says, come and eat partake of my bread. Lachmu, first of all, lachmu, sheyeh lechem, that you should come and eat my bread. Livla, then it becomes, and there's learn the Torah. And then the Torah becomes absorbed in the limbs of your soul. And then afterwards it becomes my bread. In other words, you realize that the Torah that's inside of you is really my wisdom, not just that I said 3,300 years ago, that it's right now. Like I said before, if you read an anatomy book, you see, oh, here, look at the arm has, there's the what is it called, the radius and the ulna and the this and the scapula and this, and you look at the book, this is a book from 1920. This is a different book. People are different now. That's ridiculous. This is a body. This is the way the body is. The same thing, the Torah. The Torah is, so to speak, the body of God, the commandments. That's the way it is, but it's different. In the anatomy book, this is just a picture of what it is. The Torah is the real thing. That really is God's will. That is God's wisdom right now. Behold, ba'avos, malachos, there are what's called the 39 basic basic transgressions of Shabbat. It says Shaduri the Patneket. It starts off by saying that it lists what they are. And it says there's plowing, and there's planting, and there's reaping, and there's harvesting, and there's this. So it says the first ones, they took things that are relevant to making bread. Hazorea, it says planting, etc. Kikadei, in order to make bread, and what are we saying? The Torah is like bread. In order to make bread, that it should be fit for eating of a human consumption, Ajia nivla be'avorav, until it can be digested and become part of your flesh, v'shavaka v'sor, and it becomes like your, that's what it said, like your part of you. Tzorach techila, you have to do a lot of work. And you just can't learn the Torah and say, I don't know what you're talking about, I don't feel anything. It says you want to make bread, there's a whole order of how to make bread. First of all, you have to plant, and then you have to grind, and then you have to knead, K-N-E-A-D, knead the bread, and then you have to bake it. to understand what are these four works over here. What are these four things? What does it mean? Planting and grinding and kneading, making dough and baking. That's what you have to do to the Torah in order to make bread out of it. But you have to have this before you made the bread, before the Torah becomes edible and digestible. You have to, and nourishing, you have to do these four things: planting, grinding, kneading, making into dough, kneading, and baking. Let's understand what exactly the Rebbe wants from us now. You have to understand this. The Rebbe is talking to everybody here. This is especially the Jews. You want to learn the Torah. It says a non-Jew is not supposed to learn the Torah as a commandment. He can learn the Torah to know what to do, because there's all the commandments, 7 Noahide commandments. They're really much more. They're much more universal and branched out than 7. There's a lot more. It says there's 30. The 7 are only, so to speak, negative commandments, prohibitions. But they say there's also 30 positive ones, and there's also other. Someday maybe we'll talk about that. Well, Havin, Arba, Avodos, to understand what are these 4 things we have to do in order to digest the Torah, which the Torah is pure godliness. It's higher than the soul. What are these 4 things? Planting and grinding and kneading and baking. We have to explain, first of all, what is the whole idea of planting? Let's start off with planting. But these are things you have to do with yourself, right? Now, it's a very interesting thing that if you want to eat, God makes the whole world, right? But if you want to eat, someone at least has to do work. You have to do work. I mean, the truth, there's people you can eat from garbage cans and things like that, the things that people throw away. That's also work, besides being disgusting. But if a person wants to eat properly, so somebody has to do the work, especially working on the ground. Basically, everything comes from the ground, unless you're a hunter. And the people that are hunting, also the animals that they hunt also come from things that grew from the ground. Eventually, the ground is the basis of everything. So it says, you want to make bread. Bread is the basic staple of man. So it says you want to make bread. So first of all, you have to plant. True, you have to plow the ground and everything, but you're plowing the ground only in order to plant. If the ground is soft, you don't have to plow it. But planting, you have to plant in order for there to grow up wheat and make bread. You have to plant. What is planting? Planting is, we can see from the physical world, and from this we can learn about how to serve God. Here we go. Al derech mashal, for instance, is zorin garim, when you take a seed of wheat, a wheat grain, right? You plant it. Oh, notim garin pri, or you take an apple seed and you put it in the ground, and you cover it over with dirt. The garin ahu nirkav, and then the seed has to rot. It loses its shape, naf seed, and it goes away. Then the power which is in the seed, right? The power of growth which is in the ground, somehow or other is awoken. That's it, by this seed. This matzmiach chita. This makes all of a sudden the power of growth which is in the ground, right? If you plant it in the desert, it won't grow up anything. In the ground, you plant it in water, it won't grow. There has to be the power of growth in the ground. I know there's hydro planting and things like that, but it's very rare. Or pri, then the power in the ground makes the tree or the wheat grow up. Ka'ayin garin, and it is like the seed which is in it, right? An apple seed makes apple trees grow up. A wheat seed makes wheat grow up. Because the power of growth which is in the ground is a general power. Therefore, you plant in it a seed, and the seed becomes, right, halat man, which is called the seed awakens in the ground this power of feminine waters, lower energy that comes from below to above. That's why it's called feminine. El koach hatzameach, to the power of tzemech, latzmiach koach prati ka'ayin garinahu. So therefore, the seed is the instigator. The seed is the instigator, and that is like this lower waters that arouses the power of growth in the ground. Because the seed itself also came from a previous grain of whatever stalk of wheat or an apple tree or whatever. So eventually this power of growth from the ground is what caused the seed itself to be in existence. Therefore, the seed has the power of growth concealed. So the seed also comes from the ground, and it has inside of it the power of growth on its own. But it can't grow on its own. You have to put it in the ground. The seed has the power to awaken in the ground the power of growth. Someach. Therefore, this seed has somehow or other a power to awaken the spiritual power of growth in the ground. Therefore, when this seed, it dissolves, it rots, the body of the seed, so then that releases the power of growth which is in the seed, and this then awakens the power of growth in the ground, the general power of growth which is in the ground, and that makes this what's called feminine waters that raise up from the ground, and then that makes from the grain grow up. I mean, it's very miraculous if you think about it. But Tosfos Meruba al Ikar, and then the grain gives birth to a stalk of wheat or a whole apple tree, and in the stalk of wheat are tens and tens of grains. In the apple tree, there's thousands of grains, thousands of seeds. The cane at Someach called mine peros, and it grows up all sorts of fruits and all sorts of pleasant things. The given, and there's color and there's smell, things that didn't have in the seed at all, but it was something like the seed. In other words, the seed was an apple seed. Could go in if the seed was an apple seed, then that grows up apples. If it was the seed was of grapes, then it grows grapes, etc. In this seed, you can't see anything whatsoever. There's no taste and no smell in the seed whatsoever. The seed itself is like a little piece of wood. Nevertheless, it really has somehow or other contained in it the essence of this fruit. And it has the power included in it and hidden in it that all of the tastes and all of the colors and all the smells that are in this fruit, right? There's a beautiful apple that it's red and it's sweet and it's nourishing and it has a fragrance. But it's in this seed, but it's very, very contracted that you can't see it or smell it at all. But what it has the power that it can grow, it can draw from the ground that this particular fruit or whatever will grow. The same smell and the same taste and the same fragrance and the same the nourishment. Okay, what are we trying to learn from this? This is what's called the mashal. Also, the same thing is, think about it a little bit. This is how learning Torah goes and serving God. U'b'Torah tov. Because the Torah is chachma, so this is God's will. This is God's will and God are one. God is, he's wise, but it's an infinite wisdom. It's not like our wisdom. No type of wisdom that we can imagine. But what? Just like the seed, like you have the tree, the apple tree, has this fragrance and all this, but it comes down lower and lower into the world with all this, what's called contractions and descent from level to level. It comes down very, very low until finally it's in physical world. Tefillin, mezuzah, physical things. You can't see any godliness in tefillin. You can't see any godliness in tzitzit. Who commercial? This is like the seed or the fruit that's taken from that is taken from the power of growth. This power is very, very spiritual. It's like nothingness, if you want to call it. Like it says, Tajia or it says what says the word of God that makes everything grow. You don't see the word of God in this fruit. The fruit that grows from the seed, right? At least the fruit is a little bit, it's got something in it, some spiritual qualities, but the seed has nothing in it. It says to make a fruit come from this little seed that has no taste and no smell and no fragrance, no, no nourishment. This is like something from nothing. But nevertheless, the seed does have a spiritual power because afterwards it gives birth to fruit. And the fruit is pleasant and it's tasty. But the seed itself, right? The seed itself, which you plant in the ground, this is so contracted, you can't feel any taste or smell. So it is also the Torah. The Torah, which is involved in all these physical things, and the commandments also in the physical things, gosh, man, the life, the godliness which is in the Torah is so contracted that the Torah looks like any other book in the library, right? Any other book. The same thing, an apple seed. An apple seed looks basically, unless somebody understands the difference, an apple seed has the same taste and the same smell and the same fragrance and the same nourishment as a barley seed. Right? You can't tell the difference between them unless you know what it is. But as far as the taste goes, also the same thing. The Torah looks like anything else in the world, like any other book from any other author. But really, in the upper heavens, Shehu Olam Abriya, in the world of Bria, there shines all over there a little bit of the revelation of what the Torah is. But the Torah, as it comes down to us in the world, is just like a seed. But when a Jew learns it, it goes inside of him, then that awakens up a power of godliness. And that's what we're going to talk about more, God willing, that it ends up that we provide for God. We're called Ra'isi, we're the providers for God. And this is the essence of what a Jew is. A Jew is like the ground that you put the seed in of the Torah, and then something arouses, as we're going to learn, God willing, tomorrow. Now let's learn the Davar Malchut. We'll continue on the Davar Malchut of the Rebbe.